It's a historic day because it matches a historic crisis. And our people need help. They were crying out to us to help.
I'm Julie Pace.
And I'm Ralph Russo. From the Associated Press, this is Ground Game, Inside the Outbreak.
Every day, Ralph will be bringing you coronavirus coverage straight from the breakout zones.
The coronavirus pandemic ranks among the most dynamic and widespread story ever covered here at the AP, and we've got you covered from every part of the globe. Today is Thursday, March 26th. As of this recording, there are almost 488,000 confirmed COVID-19 cases worldwide, including just over 69,000 in the United States. That's according to Johns Hopkins University's Coronavirus Resource Center. Across the globe, a little more than 22,000 who have been infected have died. Almost 118,000 who have been infected have recovered.
Today, we're in Washington, D.C., where the U.S. Senate passed a $2.2 trillion aid package to help Americans and key industries that are struggling amid the fast-moving coronavirus pandemic.
Well, Julie, thank you for letting me crash your podcast, first of all.
We're happy to have you here, Ralph.
Yeah, this has been an interesting week getting this off the ground. And again, I appreciate you letting me use your space. And I appreciate you now letting me download some information from you, because this part of I assume we'll be working into politics and government a fair amount as this pandemic plays out. But this is obviously was the biggest news of the day, with the Senate passing this $2.2 trillion package. So let's start with this. Can you give us the highlights of what's in this package and where the money is going?
Sure, absolutely. And I think you're right. This is really a pretty extraordinary moment in this pandemic, certainly in the United States. So Congress, just to set the scene a little bit here, Congress doesn't really do big things, and they certainly don't do big things in a bipartisan way of late. This is the biggest economic rescue package that Congress has done. $2.2 trillion. We saw the numbers creep up in the days that went on as lawmakers started adding to this package. And really, you have a couple of buckets that I would focus on here. One, you've got aid to individual Americans. So this is going to come in a couple different forms. This is going to come in the forms of checks directly to many Americans, $1,200 for individuals, $2,400 for families. It's also going to come in the form of unemployment aid for people who've been furloughed by their employers. That is going to be for 4 months. So that's a month longer than was originally in some of the discussions. Then you've got money that's going to major industries that have been hard hit. So we've got $50 billion for the airlines. We've got some airline manufacturers that are also going to be getting money. You've got other transportation industries, and there's $1 billion in there for Amtrak. So this was really Congress's effort to get a cash infusion to some of the industries that have had the most immediate negative impact because of coronavirus. And then another tranche that you want to look at is for small businesses. So in so many of our communities, we're seeing restaurants that are shut down, gyms, any other really small business, hair salons, nail salons. And so small business is going to get a piece of this as well. One thing that I have been saying, throughout this whole process is this is probably not the end. This is probably the beginning of what we're going to see Washington have to do to try to stabilize the economy. And this is not to stimulate the economy. This is really to just kind of get us through this first really difficult period of time that we're in here.
So as you mentioned, this got done fairly quickly, especially for Washington these days. What were the sticking points?
Yeah, so this was really done in the matter of, a week to 10 days, which is extraordinary when you think of the scope here. And there were a couple of key sticking points. So, first on the industry side of this, one of the things you want to remember is that there's a real hangover in Washington from the bailout of the financial industry during the recession in 2008. So there was a sticking point on what kind of conditions should be in this bill for industries that get money. So what can you do if you got $50 billion with that money? So there were a couple of things that Democrats pushed for and did receive, which were pretty stringent conditions, like a ban for executive bonuses for a period of time. They also want real transparency in terms of kind of an additional, what Democrats are calling a slush fund that Treasury will control for other industries, real transparency about where that money is moving around. Also limits on stock buybacks for some of these companies who are getting money. So that held things up for a little bit of time. And then the other piece of it, as I mentioned, was a real focus on what happens for the unemployed. How long would they continue to receive money for? The original time frame was 3 months. It moved up to 4 months. And we had a sort of late squabble on the Hill about the amount of money that people are going to receive. There's some complaining from some Republicans that you will find some situations where you could have people who actually are making more when they're receiving this money than they would if they were actually working. But I think where you ultimately saw lawmakers get was to a place where there just wasn't time to figure this all out to that level of detail. This was an urgently needed package. We've all been watching the markets, fall. We've been watching the unemployment rate, jobless claims skyrocket. And so, yeah, there are probably, when we look back on this, probably going to be some places where people can say, man, that was not a great idea to do it that way. But they just didn't have time, as I said, to work through the level of detail that we would often see in a package of this size.
Yeah, I think it was notable and I'm pretty obvious that the word bailout was trying to be avoided throughout all this.
Exactly. Bailouts still remain pretty unpopular in this part of the country.
So since we're in a period where everything seems to be used as political ammunition, are there any talking points already emerging that we could see being used on campaign trails later this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're going to see happen is, one of the things that was kind of funny as lawmakers were passing this, senators were passing this, is everybody's initial talking point was the same, which is this is not perfect. There are a lot of flaws in this bill, which I think is a way for everybody to give themselves some measure of cover, sort of acknowledging right off the bat that they don't love everything that's in here. I think that eventually, as we get into a place where the politics becomes more in the forefront, I think you're going to see Democrats in particular try to paint Republicans as more focused on protecting industries, more focused on protecting big business than on individual Americans. I mean, the reality is the sums are just, very disparate. Individual Americans getting $1,200 if you make $75,000 or less. Yes, that is helpful. That could help you pay some bills. But if you've just lost your job and you're trying to, pay your rent, pay your bills, continue to buy groceries, all of those things, like $1,200 doesn't go that far. And you compare that to the money for an industry like the airlines, and yeah, it does look like there's a pretty big gap there. So I do think that you're gonna see Democrats really trying to lean in on that, though they know that protecting the airlines is also directly helping a lot of individual Americans who work for those airlines. If the airlines aren't going to be bailed out here, then what happens to all of those airline employees? So this is, a kind of a cycle. And, the politics doesn't always kind of capture the nuance and the way that these pieces really do fit together.
So there's so much news when it comes to this story nowadays. It's easy to forget it was only a couple of days ago that President Trump said he would like to ease some of the restrictions put in place on the population to combat the virus and get people working again by as soon as Easter, which is less than a month away. I'm wondering your thoughts on that. And with so much uncertainty from day to day, is there a strategy coming out of the administration to projecting the situation a month from now and trying to do so optimistically?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, it's so interesting right now because you watch these daily White House briefings and there is just this massive disconnect between what the president is actually saying and what the situation on the ground in so many states and so many communities is. The other day, the president was actually using phrases like, as we come to the end of this crisis, as we, move, out of this. And you have governors, mayors, hospital workers saying, hey, we're at the beginning of this right now. I think part of this from the president is he wants to put, an optimistic spin on this. He thinks that is good for him politically. He thinks that is good for the economy. He thinks it's a signal to markets that maybe we won't be in a state of shutdown for months to come. There's just really no way as we get into next week, there is just no way that you will have the actual situation on the ground improving. Even if the president of the United States said, hey, I want to open up the economy for business, you've got governors all over the country, Republicans and Democrats, who are saying we are just not able to do that right now. We have to control this spread of the virus more. So I think the president's strategy is to try to promote the work of his administration, to try to signal to Americans that the administration has a handle on this. But he's going to struggle, I think, to try to really make that message stick when the reality on the ground for people, what they can see with their own two eyes, what they can see, in their lives and in their families' lives and their neighbors' lives is just so different.
Yeah, and I think it's probably worth pointing out that no matter what the federal government does as far as easing restrictions, ultimately, as you said, it comes down to governors and maybe even mayors and local authorities to really put in place what works best or what they feel is working best in their own communities.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is a situation where the president, in a lot of cases, is more messenger than anything else, but governors and mayors have a lot more power, as do individual business owners. You could make a decision to keep your business closed if you don't think that you're going to have customers, or you don't want to put your employees in a position to get sick. You might just keep your business closed, even if it's going to have a short-term economic impact for you.
Julie Pace is the Washington bureau chief for the AP. This is also her podcast, Ground Game. So, Julie, thank you very much again for letting me share the podcast with you. Thank you very much for sharing this conversation and getting us up to date on the latest of the news coming out of Washington related to the coronavirus.
We're very happy to have you part of the Ground Game family, Ralph. That's it for this episode of Ground Game. With both a pandemic and a presidential campaign to keep an eye on, we'll be here every step of the way, giving you all the news you need to know. Be sure to tell a friend about us, and please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. This episode of Ground Game was recorded on Thursday morning. Some of the details of our discussion may have changed by the time you hear this. For up-to-date developments on all of your news, head over to apnews.com.
From the Westwood One Podcast Network.